I will, of course, preamble set the stage for the focus of today, which is assessing whether or not a microbial-based or microbial-containing crop biostimulant inoculation or treatment is actually working and providing a return on investment. But before we get there, I'd like to just welcome everyone to the call. For those that don't know, my name is Matt Kleinhens. I'm a vegetable extension specialist at Ohio State University. I work from an office at the Ohio Agricultural Research and Development Center in Worcester, Ohio, which is where I am today, along with others that I'll introduce here shortly. My job over the next 90 minutes is to ensure that you are repaid for the time that you spend on the call, and you should be repaid in different ways. The first way should be with information that you can actually put to use right away. The second way that you should be repaid is in the knowledge that your input is important, and that you're welcome to join us going forward as we work to help everyone get more from their use of experience with crop biostimulants that share 4 important characteristics. And again, as part of this introduction to the call, I need to specify what those 4 characteristics are. First, the products that we're talking about contain microbes as an active ingredient. Secondly, they are OMRI listed and used by sustainable organic growers. But of course, being OMRI listed does not preclude them from being used by other growers. Third, they are advertised to enhance growth and/or resistance to stress. And finally, they are applied to vegetable crops, although we have often said, and I hope it to be true, that what we discussed during the call that may be focused on vegetable crops also applies to other crops as much as the principles will allow. Okay? So before we get down to business, I think it's important to cover 6 bits of background to complete this introduction before we get into the actual conversation. First, please note that you are currently muted. You cannot be heard. I am the only person that can be heard. So as you might have just heard, you will remain muted until you push *6 on your device dialer pad. That will unmute you and, of course, allow you to ask a question or make a comment. Third, when you unmute yourself, please remember that we hope to hear your voice, and essentially only your voice, not any significant amount of background noise. So if needed, please push *6 again after making your comment or asking a question, just to ensure that we're able to keep background noise to a minimum on the call. It's a treat and opportunity to have so much experience on the call today, as represented by the people who have joined in. We hope to hear from as many of you as possible, but in an orderly, productive fashion. So I do appreciate your remaining muted until you wish to speak up at other times. So on that note, if email works for you and you prefer that route, you can reach us, including right now, but of course at other times also. By us, I mean members of the project team, which many of whom are with us this afternoon, at the following email address: vegbiostimsferts. And yes, we had to go all that way to get an approved email address. The spelling is VEGEBIOSTIMSFERTS, that's vegbiostimsferts, @gmail.com. So that email is live now. It's always live, of course, and you can reach us using it if you'd like, and just remain muted through the call. Stephanie, who is here in the room with us and an integral part of the project team, will be monitoring the email traffic and sharing with me any questions or comments that might come up through it. So the 5th bit of background is that the call is made possible because of support from the USDA Organic Transitions Program, the North Central Region SARE Research and Extension Education Program, and the companies and organizations that are represented by all of you on the call. And so we'd like to acknowledge that support because it is very important. It allows us to actually make the headway that we're trying to make here today. You might also be wondering who else is on the call. I can't offer specific details, of course, but you may recall the information that you shared when you registered. And based on that, I can reliably say that we have people representing multiple U.S. states, universities, biostimulant manufacturers, and individual farm and consultancy businesses. So we do have a solid cross-section, I believe, of the community of people interested in these products. Also, many of them are involved in sustainable organic veg production, although not exclusively, in some way. So, but as you speak up or email in, feel free to introduce yourself and give a quick summary of how you come to be interested in these products, if you would find that to be useful to share with us. So that completes the background. I'll just remind you that you can't be heard at this point. To be heard, you need to push *6. And I guess we'll unmute people to ask if there are any questions or comments. Hearing none? Okay. Last bit of background before we get to the conversation. For those that have participated in our previous calls and or who listened to them, recordings of them, at our so-called Bugs in a Jug webpage, you recall that we covered a wide range of topics describing microbe-containing biostimulants and that we uncovered important questions about them. Those questions will take more time to answer to everyone's satisfaction, especially grower satisfaction. And you also recall that the panelists provided us important insights and advice, and that's definitely going to be true today. So now it's the time I'd like to introduce our resource people and panelists, folks that have been called upon to be with us this afternoon or this morning, as it might be, and provide us with their insights. So along with all of you as participants, we have 4 people committed to being resource people, and they are Maria Soledad Benitez Ponce of the OSU. She's here in the room with us. Sabu Kumarapan, also of Ohio State. He's also in the room with us. Bonnie Onley of the University of Tennessee, and Andy Radin of the University of Rhode Island. So they're all ready, willing, and able to address questions, but also, of course, we want to hear from people who are on the call as well with their questions and comments. So everyone's here to address the main topic of the day, which is assessing whether a microbe-containing crop biostimulant that has been applied is actually working, if it is actually providing to the user or whoever may be interested in it an adequate return on investment. And as you know, as we've covered in these calls and other resources such as publications, there are many of these products on the market, and they are reported to have different modes of action, that is, to work in different ways. Regardless, we have heard previously, or even probably experienced, that their effects can be subtle, that it can be difficult to determine if an inoculant is actually working and worth the investment. Previous calls focused on, for example, previous 2 calls focused first on selecting an inoculant. The second call focused on using an inoculant, the ways, steps to take to ensure that it is likely to have the best possible return on investment. Today, we're focused on actually assessing that return on investment and the effect as a separate stage in making the best possible use of these products. So not knowing what to look for or how to assess or quantify those effects of an inoculation can result in, at the very least, confusion, actually result in worse. So today we look to help clarify, especially for growers and people who advise them, the steps that can be taken to determine if an inoculation program has been, quote, worth it. No, is it worth it? And I'm expecting to hear lots of good, vigorous discussion around this particular topic. But to get us started, I'd like to turn to Bonnie Onley, who I know has a lot of experience with various types of products, especially ones designed to help limit the onset or spread of disease, plant disease. There, it seems that treatment effects can be a bit more dramatic and, by comparison, more clear than the effects due to biostimulants. At least that is I think, widely and strongly held perception. So, Bonnie, I'll just turn to you first and ask, what advice you would give to growers or others who have used or who are about to use a biostimulant. What steps should they consider as they look to determine if it's having the desired effect, and what do you look for? What do you look for after one or more of these applications have been made in your work with them or similar products? Where should a grower or a grower advisor start?
Okay, can you hear me, Matt?
Yes. Yep, coming through well. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for the introduction. I wanted to start just by going through the process of the plant coming into contact with the pathogen. As we all know, these effects of biostimulants can be multiple and complex, and that's certainly the case with a microbial biostimulant and a plant pathogen. Those effects can be direct or indirect. For example, there are a number of pathogens that can survive for long periods of time in soil or on pieces of organic matter or on debris from the previous crop. So when you direct seed into that soil, the seed is vulnerable to attack. And the same goes for when you direct seed into some sort of peat-based potting mix, because some of them have naturally occurring pathogens in them. Peat's harvested from the ground in wet, boggy areas, and that's the perfect habitat for pathogens like Pythium. And Pythium can be especially destructive on seedlings in a cool environment. It causes much less damage on older plants. So when you put a seed into that environment and the seed imbibes water, and then that little radical, which will become the root, begins to grow, it's going to normally exude a mucilaginous type of gel, and that gel has lots of interesting compounds, sugars, amino acids, organic acids, and other compounds that pathogens can use for food. And pathogens can chemically sense these food compounds coming from that growing root and will grow towards them. So a biostimulant that has microorganisms in it and has been applied to seed or perhaps around the base of a transplant is going to compete with the pathogens for that small amount of food that the plant root is releasing. And in some cases, those biostimulant microorganisms may simply outcompete the pathogens for nutrients leaked from the root. And if you think about it, because the healthy roots are leaking that slow, steady release of nutrients, if you're a microorganism, being right next to the root is a much more hospitable place to be than out in fallow soil a few inches away. And we see that when we compare populations of microorganisms either on or right up against the root compared to out in the fallow soil. So I've said that regarding, got another phone going off, just a moment. Regarding competition, it can be for those nutrients or it can be for other things, for space, for example, because a lot of these microorganisms will go into the root, these biostimulant microorganisms. And the ones that we've been looking at through this project are primarily in three different categories. They may be bacteria only, they may be bacteria plus fungi, or fungi only. And the species that are in those different formulations generally find their way inside the root. The bacteria live between the root cells, or in the case of those mycorrhizal fungi, they have specialized structures that they use to form a physical linkage with the root cells. And in that situation, they exchange various mineral nutrients, water, that kind of thing. So that's another way that these biostimulant microorganisms compete with pathogens, and that is literally for space, either on the surface of the root or right inside the root. And it can give them a competitive advantage. And some of these organisms also produce antibiotics, and that are detrimental to the pathogens, and that, again, another competitive advantage. I mentioned that these biostimulant microorganisms can also help the plant indirectly resist pathogen attack, and that's because they can stimulate the plant's own immune system. Plants produce a variety of different chemical compounds to help them fight pathogens, but often the plant reaction is too slow to shut down pathogen damage. And if you have a biostimulant microorganism who is causing a little bit of irritation there, it's getting in between the root cells, it might actually prime the pump so the plant will respond more quickly to pathogen attack by producing those compounds that help it resist pathogens more quickly. And the other thing of biostimulant microorganisms do is they improve the nutrient status of the plant, and generally a healthier, more vigorous plant is better able to withstand or react more quickly to a pathogen attack. So that's a lot to say.
No, that's, I mean, I think that gives us an excellent foundation for moving forward with other details that I'm sure are going to grow out of what you just provided us with, Bonnie. Because as I look at my notes, for example, the first part of what you said regarding the competition factor, competition for nutrients and space. Looking at it from a grower's perspective, is that it's reasonable to say then that an inoculated plant might be growing faster, right?
Right, it is.
It might be growing faster compared to an uninoculated one, compared to an untreated one. So the first, because we want to know, we want to get a sense here, and we'll also at some point get to the economics portion, which Sabu can help lead us through. But we're looking for signs that a grower or a grower advisor might have of an inoculant providing some sort of benefit. And based on the modes of action summary that you shared, Bonnie, one thing that jumps out to me is, the plants will grow faster. For that, we would possibly need an uninoculated control to be able to tell the difference, right?
Exactly.
Or we would need really good records of the crops that we have grown in the past, records perhaps including photographs, old term, now they're pics, right? So we'd have to have some sort of visual record of past crops in order to compare our current ones to, especially if all of those current ones are inoculated. If we're not leaving an uninoculated control. So one is they're growing faster. They might nutrient status, they might be a different color. They could be a deeper green. They could be less purple if they're suffering from phosphorus deficiency, so forth. Third, and I guess I'll definitely turn to Bonnie, you and Soledad on this because it's clearly your area, specific to plant disease. If it so happens that there's an inoculated group of crop plants and an uninoculated group of crop plants, it's possible that the uninoculated ones, I don't know, Soledad, maybe you want to comment on this, it's possible that the uninoculated ones will show less disease if disease is present. Is that a reasonable assumption, or, with lots of disclaimers?
Yeah, well, I guess with lots of disclaimers, like you said, but like Bonnie was saying, there is this priming effect on plant resistance that can happen in response to some of the microbial inoculants. And I think that has been clearly shown, for instance, for arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. There's a lot of information about how they are activating plant responses. So there could be differences in terms of disease incidence in the field. So
let me interrupt real fast.
Yeah.
For those, because it might be an important point of clarification. Yeah. I am not a pathologist, and I'm not trying to pretend that I am one, but incidence is a word I'm seizing on here because you often hear about it, for those that are not so familiar with it, you hear about incidence and severity. Would you give us a primer on those two?
Okay, so hopefully I do this correctly, and if I don't, Bonnie, please help me.
Okay.
Yeah, no, so, I guess the incidence will be, if you have 100 plants, do you have disease in 50 of those plants?
Percentage of plants that are affected.
Yeah, and then severity will be within that plant. Do you have 100% of those leaves that are diseased are completely dead?
Right,
or no,
so it's like
how sick are they?
Okay.
So there will be two things. So in terms of how to look for disease, there's different ways to look at it. And I think when Bonnie was talking about the inoculation on seedlings and the problem with soil-borne diseases, a good measure is that's generally used is initial establishment and stand. So just looking out, after planting, and I have been mostly been working in field crops versus vegetables, but I guess this still applies. So, a few weeks after planting, you want to see how well your plants were established. If you're
put 1,000 seed out, you get 1,000 plants.
Yeah,
right.
That will be the ideal situation. Right. And then, maybe some of them will come up faster or not, but which could be an advantage and a disadvantage, right, sure, depending on the condition. But I think that will be a good measure of looking at soil-borne disease pressure and trying to look at, is this inoculant maybe affecting that? But Matt did bring a good point of, we need data, either a control that has not been inoculated for that year to be able to assess, or a little bit of historical data from those fields for comparison. And you can probably do a little bit of that later in the season as well. And, one of the things that I've been thinking about is that sometimes the responses to these microbial inoculants are probably going to be more obvious in situations where you have higher stress in your field. So if you have a year that you have a lot of disease pressure going on, like, great conditions for developing, let's say, a leaf disease, then it might be more obvious than the difference when you have an inoculant or not. And I think that's probably one of the challenges of making this assessment.
Right. So we've had, as others know, you might know, who've been with us for a while now in these discussions, we have overall been trying to sort out the role of these products in production, right? And the term insurance policy has come up often, partly because there's an acknowledgement that many times they are used before the stress, whether it's abiotic or biotic in origin, sets in. And, of course, we don't know what kind of season we're going to have until it actually unfolds. But by that time, most, I think, manufacturers, and I think we have some on the call, and they're going to want to chime in soon. Most manufacturers, I gather, encourage the use of their product early in the season, much like Bonnie was saying, at direct seeding or transplanting, so that the plant microbe interaction that we're trying to foster here gets established, and that
yes,
factor can come into play, or the microbe can actually have a biochemical, if you will, direct biochemical effect on the plant. But Andy, if I could, I'll just turn to you. I don't know if we need to unmute for Andy to be heard. We probably do. So, Andy, in working with these products, or people who do work with them, or just from your overall experience, what do you look for, or what do people look for to determine if they're working?
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. What I look for is not necessarily what growers look for, and I have to say, I think I'm very cautious in terms of I have a concern about a placebo effect. I think that, and I know of growers now who are maybe not necessarily using biostimulants by your definition, but using in general non-traditional products, if I can call it that, and people are saying things that they make some great proclamations, and again, it's like what I usually see, and this has been referenced, is that people aren't really leaving some plants for controls, and so my concern is always that, okay, well, gosh, maybe you plowed in a really good cover crop this year. Maybe it was a really cold winter and some pathogens didn't survive, or you turned your residues under deeper and so your pathogens weren't close to your plants the following year. Any number of things. I guess it's rare for me to encounter any growers who are doing something where they can really observe some clear-cut differences, just because they're not setting things up that way. And in most cases, these people don't have the time to do that either. So
that makes a lot of sense. But within the context of these products specifically, there may be a placebo effect. There may not be, and we're going to unmute everybody here so that they can chime in. within the context of the microbe-containing biostimulants and whether or not there's a, quote, placebo effect, and we've acknowledged that there is a benefit to having a control.
And of course, I just want to mention the placebo I'm talking about is on the grower, like, that they think they're seeing something better, or, that I'm not talking about.
Yeah, so that's the point I'd like to, so you bring up a very good point. I'd like to drill down on that just for a moment, okay? Ultimately, I think we need to soon we need to turn to Cebu from the economic standpoint. Growers have their own way to assess their economic status. I mean, I think even Cebu would agree with that, right? And most of us would agree with that. We do want Cebu's perspective on the same. From the placebo effect, Andy, or about the placebo effect, and growers thinking that they're seeing an effect, I'll put the question out to the growers and others on the call. What is it that they think they're seeing? Is it greener, bigger? What's going on? How are people telling, coming to some tentative conclusion that there's an effect happening? Yeah. So,
control, in my opinion, is a mandate. Without a control, there is nothing to compare to. Going back to history or last season or a photograph or an adjacent field isn't a fair evaluation for anybody, not the product, not the grower, and there's no means to validate a return on investment. When there is a side-by-side control, can everybody hear me?
Yes, thank you.
When there is a side-by-side control, I find that I, as well as my customers, my growers, see a numerous range of benefits, but that's going to be dependent on the crop, the circumstance, and the product being deployed. That as Bonnie outlined, the benefits can be numerous, and yes, I see, just to give a short list of benefits that I'm used to observing, is a strong early rooting, which leads to better nutritional uptake and moisture access. With that, you have plants that are not undergoing the traditional stress of, if it's underrooted, it becomes overwatered. With overwatered circumstances, plants succumb to disease with greater ease. So if we can get an earlier, more uniform emergence with better nutritional uptake, the crop grows better, fills the canopy better. Production is often earlier. Yields are higher, with higher bricks, lower moisture requirements as we cover the canopy or fill the canopy. There's less evapotranspiration coming off of the soil surface. So these things can be only effectively assessed when there is a control. I know many of my customers have been guilty of not putting the control out, and I'm always chagrined, and I don't like the placebo effect. I think it's working, and I go, well, like Andy said, was it just a good season, just a good field? Was disease pressure down? It's creating a control is as easy as pinching off a line when you're using drip irrigation, or a little more complex with controlled delivery. And if you're doing, let's say, pipe irrigation, you do a controlled delivery with a spray, and then localized, and then or localized omission of that spray, and then irrigate in a soil inoculant. I don't want to ramble on, but that's my quick 2 cents.
Those are it's actually worth more than 2 cents.
Yeah.
I think it's excellent. Allow me to just ask this in follow-up. Would we advocate for not treating an area basically every year, even though we suspect the product may work? We want that control there to help verify.
I would say That's a good question, and growers that are constantly looking at new and different products and have perpetual challenges that need be solved. They haven't, cracked the nut. The miracle product has not met their presence. Yes, perpetual control, even if you're leaving out 5%, that's suitable. But at some point, I think if a product doesn't validate itself well enough from applied research, I don't want any of my customers doing statistical analysis. They're welcome to, but that's the burdensome task of someone go collect the data. It should be readily observable as a visual variance at a root level, at a foliar level. Pictures help in highlight conditions and field conditions. Our eyes don't always pick up what a photograph can. So exhuming some plants, taking side-by-side photos in low light conditions, and then looking at those in a magnified environment on a computer for future reference is always helpful. But at some point, the product need prove itself in a significant fashion to justify its continued use. If it doesn't, in one circumstance or another, or one particular crop or challenge, I hate to say it, but you got to move on and look for the product that's going to bring the benefit.
Excellent. There's a lot to unpack there. Bonnie and Soledad, I guess I'll just turn to you, pathologist. And again, I'm simplifying, so I apologize ahead of time. We have lesions, or we have vascular plugging, or we have, as two symptoms of disease. You apply a treatment as applied. The lesions don't increase in number or size. The number of plants that are affected does not increase. I'm not saying it's simple and easy. Okay, I am saying though it might be more clear, more readily obvious, as we were just hearing through straight out visual observation, that the disease progression has stopped, whether it be incidence or severity or both. Right. My sense of what we just heard and what we've also talked about in earlier calls with the biostimulants is that the effects they are different, okay, because they're not there to outright, if you will, act as biocontrol agents in the classic biopesticide role. They can have that impact, but they're there to do other things. So we may need to look at root masses. Like was said, we may need to look at the size of the canopy. We may need to see when flowering and fruiting start. Of course, we want to pay attention to yield, and when we get to make some calculations about whether or not the cost of the product was more than exceeded by the benefits of inoculation. But do I have that right about the pathology side? I mean, has it been given enough attention, or do we need to spend another minute on it?
Well, let me jump in for a minute. Can you hear me, Matt?
Yep.
Okay. So when you're working with biological controls, traditional biological controls, or a microorganism that's part of a biostimulant product, you're going to have much more success in suppressing disease if it's applied in a preventative manner rather than a curative. And so after you already see disease, the horse has left the barn. It's going to be very difficult to do anything at that point. That's why we advocate putting it on seed or on transplants to go ahead and start that relationship early before a disease situation manifests itself.
True enough.
And,
so preventative.
Right, preventative rather than curative. And the other thing I'll say is the discussion about controls is wonderful. It's very important. I would say, though, that in doing that, please don't limit the control area to a given section of a field, because over time, if you have disease problems and you're not doing anything in the way of some sort of microorganisms to maybe offset that, then your disease problems are going to increase over time, and it could be that the control over the years is going to look worse and worse. And that's, not what you want either. It's sort of a compounding the situation, if you will.
Sure. Well, anything to add, do you think? I mean, is that...
Yeah, so I was thinking on what you were saying, Matt, in terms of how do you measure that difference in disease. So it could be a difference of, in how many plants are infected, on how severe those are, but also how much they change over time. So there might still be some disease present, but probably in the plants that are inoculated, the disease might be lower, or it is low enough that's really not limiting yield or flower production or other productivity measure.
Yeah.
So, and because we're talking about these are not biopesticides, so you're not really targeting that disease. It's more the overall plant health.
Okay.
So I mean, I will expect to have some difference in between the non-treated versus the treated, but the treated could still have some disease. It might just not be limiting production.
Perfect. So, Andy and Sabu, I'd like to, if it's okay, maybe turn to you next, and of course others as well on the call. Are there any questions from the gallery, so to speak, at this point about assessing effects? This is something that we deserve some special attention. There is some background noise coming from somewhere on the call. I'm not sure exactly where. If you could be mindful and mute yourself if you're not speaking up, that would be great. So we're not limiting our conversation to just specialty crop or vegetable growers, but it's important to have a focal point and to begin somewhere. For the most part, as I think one comment was made earlier points to, have to know what the product is and what the desired effect is. So in one case, a greener crop actually could mean more money. Okay? A greener leaf of lettuce or a greener leaf of spinach or a larger leaf or I'm using a color. Specialty crop growers, particularly herb, flower, and vegetable growers, are often keenly aware of the role that quality plays in their product. And that quality is defined using physical, chemical, sensory, and other properties. Of course, everything can be boiled down to much can be boiled down to chemical anyway. There's a reason why the leaf is darker green. It has more of the pigment, okay? But from where does that pigment come, okay? That's the underlying question. Why is it there? Because the crop was treated. So specialty crop growers are often very aware of the role that quality can play. And I would guess if there are any specialty crop growers on the call that would like to speak up on this particular topic, is anyone seeing the potential benefit of inoculation being in the quality of their product, not necessarily how much of it they have, the yield size? Anyone want to address that? There are special circumstances.
This is Nate again. I'll chime in before you close that topic.
Sure.
I come from a very specialty market of floriculture, commercial flower production, nursery production, and a lot of revenue is lost or won on the shrink that occurs in a greenhouse. We're talking about high capital investment space. They plant 100 plants, grow 100 plants, and we classify it as, the best stuff is A grade, the runner-up is B grade, and you may have C and duds, no grows, right? Physical losses. Oftentimes, growers using conventional practices will factor in anywhere from 3 to 10+% on a given crop that's going to be lost. That's physical losses that will never manifest as in a saleable plant. Beyond that, there's a considerable portion of B grade plants. So if you think of a poinsettia that you may buy in a floral store, when thousands of plants fill a greenhouse, it's beautiful. But you don't know how good the plant is until you reach for it and try and pack it. So the physical strength of that plant and the quality of its architecture, cosmetically, is a quality grade, and consumers want quality, and the grower wants to supply quality. They'll put in mostly A, squeeze, we call it, squeeze some B product in, but if they're left with a whole bunch of B, they have to find a lesser market to send it to at a highly discounted price. So I've found personally that my growers using biostimulants that fall into the category of this discussion have improved their yield, reduced their shrink, and sharply improved the value because they have less B and C grade. And I think that translates in the vegetable world, produce world, of how many A grade potatoes, strawberries, head lettuce, whatever, or tomatoes you're producing. I believe these products, the right products, can contribute significantly to the bottom line by just nudging the product quality up to a higher level.
Nate, thank you for that very much. There are no doubt parallels between your world, floriculture world, and the vegetable and herb world with regard to quality and quality grades. Every tomato grower knows that. I mean, every vegetable grower that I know of some stripe and capacity and experience knows that there are quality grades, and that money is lost based on the percent of the crop going to each category. So it may not be as you said earlier, I think, statistical phenomenon where total yield was increased. It may be an increase in A grade yield, if we will, right? And that goes to a whole other market, a whole other price point, and a whole other calculus that Sabu will eventually get to comment on here.
Probably I should jump in now.
Yeah. Another whole level of calculus to grower equations. Sabu, working with the many growers that you have, and students too. Students who are, and Sabu can elaborate on this as he likes, but Sabu is with Ohio State University Agricultural Technical Institute. 2-year associate's degrees are offered there, and I'm not a homie, but I will say it's a pretty good institution for that degree. And Sabu is an integral part of the instruction team there. But he's also making lots of contributions to projects like these and working with the grower community. So a number of the people that Sabu works with as students may end up in owning their own farm, managing their own farm, or working for somebody who does, right, or some farm-related business. So, Sabu, if you would be willing to comment on the farm-level tools, right, the farm-level steps that a grower can take to assess from an economics standpoint, from a money in the wallet or money in the bank account perspective, what farm-level steps can they take? I know that, at least through my lens, it's a narrow one. Working with growers as I have, there are seat in the pants calculations, and then there are like actual spreadsheet software-based ones, and everyone employs their own style. They use their own style. Can you just share kind of an overview of how you would approach somebody who's come to you with a question like, hey, how do I figure out if these products are actually working? Where would you take them?
Thanks, Matt. So I would say, actually, I do get quite a few floriculture students in my classes, and many of them do want to grow high-value crops and flowers and things like that, so that they will start a retail store. And one of the common questions that will come up is, how much are you going to spend on these, producing these products? What will be the quality? What will be the brightness of the flowers? How long? What is the shelf life? What are the different types of inputs you use? And the students, from a student perspective, they may be learning things, so they may not know exactly everything. But at the same time, when you actually take the growers into account, I'm sure they have a lot more experience. And as it was mentioned earlier in the call, there has to be controls, and that having control is the only way how we can tell whether something is of good value or not, whether they should continue to do that or not. Now, just to kind of change the topic slightly differently, let me share some of my experiences from a recent survey, and the survey is of organic corn growers. Okay. These are not high-value specialty crop or horticultural products. Now, when we collected this information from various farmers here in Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, we asked a series of questions. What are the different types of inputs you use? And farmers often think in terms of different kind of fertilizer mixes. That is the major nutrient, and then micronutrient. And when you ask in terms of what are the other inputs you use, some of them do use microbes, but then we have to ask them specifically. If we don't ask them, then it just gets washed out. People don't mention it. They don't even mention it. Right. Now, how do they talk about the microbial products that they use? Oftentimes, if they are using it, once you give a specific place so that they can, this is a mail survey, so we are able to, we are unable to talk to them in person, but I'm sure if you do another type of survey asking questions, we can probably have even longer conversations, even in more depth conversations on their microbial products use. So these numbers, we are still assembling them, so I don't quote me on this yet. Based on the surveys that I am quoting right now, 10 to 15% of the farmers is what I would say that they are writing something for microbial product use. Okay. In the case of organic corn. Now, it will be different for different crops. It will be different for different states. So that's an interesting thing that I am observing. Some places there is more recognition of that. Probably there are better salespeople that go and convince the farmers to use that. And many times I'm not using the word growers because I want to differentiate corn farmers from the vegetable growers, I guess. Corn farmers often mention that they take the guidance of the local salespeople, or they take the guidance of the of the soil test results. Mm-hmm. And that, for instance, there are quite a few farmers in this survey that got their information or the soil fertilizer recommendations or even microbial inputs from a company in Iowa. Huh, okay. Super Grow of Iowa, I think that's the name of the company. So thing is that I would like to emphasize or highlight that aspect that often farmers and growers will depend on the companies and the consultants and the experts to rely on that. So we are an educational institution. How are we going to create an impact on farmers' growing practices? That's something for us to think about. So, involving salespeople, and already there was another person who was talking about various types of sales aspects. How are they going to convince your customer that this product is good? Yeah. Whether you're going to show them very, bright green leaves or some other type of readily visible signs. So these are the things that will again come back to it.
So so we talked about the placebo effect earlier.
Yeah.
The statement, I think it's working, and we kind of we hit that one hard. I think from the standpoint of trying to encourage people to use a control that is a non-treated section, consistently. And Bonnie pointed out that non-treated section should be moved around the farm or moved around the crop planting, so that it itself doesn't become part of the bias. But we also talked about the effects of the inoculants on plants being potentially so varied. And you keep using the word subtle, which would mean, in this case, not dramatic. We're not going to triple the size of the plant. We're not going to multiply the yield by 5 times. We're not going to, in the case of, say, a biocontrol or a pesticide that would be used for disease management, we're not going to literally stop the disease in its tracks, I think with the biostimulants, previous calls and conversations and other reports and even the literature point to the effects being less dramatic. Okay? Now, when it comes to the farmer's wallet or their bank account, that's quantitative. That's something that, most growers will have a sense of. Did I make more money this year than I did last year? What was the change? If I made more money this year, what was the one thing I changed? Oh, well, you know what? I used a microbial-based biostimulant. Do I put all my eggs in the biostimulant basket? Would you say something like, well, did you make other changes? Right?
Yeah.
You'd have to ask the question, did you make other changes? Do you have a control? Are you keeping records specific to your crop? So like they inoculate let's just choose one. They choose a tomato crop. That'd be a good example in this case. Hey, you sell your tomatoes at such and such a market. Did you keep track of the area that you treated and the area that you didn't treat to know where your income would have come from? Does it have to get to that level of precision?
Certainly. You really touched upon very interesting things. And, record keeping is a very integral part of analyzing whether an input is efficient or not, whether it is able to bring the desired results, whether we are able to justify the continued use of the product as we move along. Now, another thing, again, this would be slightly different for the growers that grow specialty crops and vegetables and fruits, I guess. One thing I noticed based on the surveys is if the farmer gives very specific set of inputs for their production, they talk about different types of NPK, composition. They use compost and manure, and they use other type of things. And in addition, if they include microbial products, and often I see a high correlation in terms of higher yield. So, use of very, very many pieces of inputs correlates with higher yields. So the farmers are really paying attention to what their crop needs, what their crop needs are, and they are able to bring that into that field. So they are able to increase the yield, and that is certainly there. And we can very well be sure of that. If the farmer lists, more than 5 or 6 different inputs in case of organic corn, the yield is easily 150 bushels per acre or more. In organic corn, that's a better yield in the list compared to what I see. Some farmers use very few inputs, literally just manure and compost, and their yields are, 70 to 100 bushels an acre. Again, I know I am talking in terms of corn and soybeans.
But there's a parallel.
Yeah, there is a parallel. That's what I'm trying to draw here. In fact, I want to, conduct another kind of survey for vegetable growers with regard to not just microbes, but a whole range of other inputs. Because, in my opinion, focusing only on microbes kind of washes out the effect of other things. Or if we focus survey only on microbial use, then we may overemphasize the microbial.
So in this case, our conversation for your purposes, our conversation would be too limited. It would be too narrow. It would be
microbial
misleading, maybe.
Yeah, because the amount of money that the farmers spend on microbial products is very less. Anywhere from 5 to 15% of their overall input goes towards microbial products.
So let me jump in real fast, and I'm just going to get to I want to put this question to the group, folks that are listening in on, the comments that have been going back and forth involving other people. It has been said many times, in and outside of these phone calls, that microbial-based biostimulants are a type of insurance policy. That the logic is this. Microbes are good. The right ones are good. They may be beneficial. They're unlikely to be a problem. They're not all that expensive, so why not use them? And it seems like everyone's doing it. So hey, I should too. Now, the question I would put to the group is, do we even? This is only half joking. Do we even need to be assessing whether or not these products are working if everyone's expectation of them is just to prevent, the real downward slide in yield? Do we actually need to calculate the benefit of insurance? That's what I would put to the group, What does anyone have anyone want to comment on that?
Yes, I definitely think we should, or we don't know where we're going. We're putting a shot in the dark.
Okay, so you would advocate for continued, assessment of whether or not even something that costs $10, $15 an acre is worth that $10, $15 an acre. I'm just using those numbers.
Yes, definitely.
Is that correct? Okay, good to hear. Anybody else want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think I was thinking on Suba's comment on, when he looked at the farmers that have all these different inputs and then, like 5 or 6 different things, and they get higher yield. And what's the interaction there? I mean, it's so hard to piece apart which one of those inputs is the one that's resulting, or is a collective action.
Right.
So is it because the farmers are just paying more attention and working more in their field and trying to get, that it's resulting in this more than the actual specific action of
But I would put that, so I'll interrupt. I apologize. Yeah. I'll say, look, if microbial-based biostimulants is one of the 6 that they're using, in as much as anyone would want to care about those products, we need to figure out what they're contributing. And the sense is that, and I would very much like to be proven wrong. Okay, this is not about me being right. This is about finding the truth with a capital T. My sense is that they are regarded as a product that can enhance yield by somewhere in the range of 10%. And I think I don't want to put words in John Kemp's mouth, but I think he said on our first or second call, look, if it doesn't give you 10%, I wouldn't bother. Something along those lines. That call was recorded, so we can go back and verify if I'm remembering it correctly now. I mean, do we all want to have a number in mind or do growers have a number in mind that they need to justify the investment? That's a question I'd put out to the growers or others on the call. Is there a number in mind that you have to have?
This is Nate chiming in. I think it's dependent on each and every circumstance, right? What is a bushel of organic corn worth, right? If you can go up by 10% on that crop, your yield goes up by 10%, how many dollars is that? So what kind of investment are you trying to offset? So if it costs you $10 to $15 an acre and you recover $750 an acre, no-brainer, right?
Right.
But there's going to be crops that are much thinner on their value, and therefore it would require perhaps more than 10% increase to recover that investment.
That's a great point. Yeah, so I anticipate that everything, in my vegetable world, everything from artichoke to zucchini would have its own price point, if you will, its own return on investment, its own break-even point, right? But I just want to make sure that, maybe I'm preaching to the choir, people have the tools to do that,
Well,
are they lacking?
Hey, Matt.
Yeah, please.
Matt, I just wanted to add, I think, too, that we're going to find that some crops, there's more impact from biostimulants than others. Some crops are more vulnerable to pathogens or to environment stresses and things like that. And perhaps those are the ones that I think growers will find that they have a positive effect from. I have to tell you the story because it goes right along with what we're talking about. So this morning, before I got to work, one of the growers I'm working with sent me this picture and a text, and she'd lined up some of the biostimulants that we're testing, and there were huge differences in growth, and they were all planted at the same time. And so my first question was, well, where's your control? And she'd forgotten to put that in the picture. So she went and got the controls and put those in the pictures, and sure enough, there really is a big effect. And so I've been texting on and off. I sent some students out to go and take a look and go take some measurements. And while we've been talking, she sent me another text with some pictures. She pulled up some plants, and one of the biostimulants, she said, look at this incredible root system. And that's something that was discussed on this talk too. The impact on the root system can just cause a cascade of positive things for the plant. So I just wanted to add that to our conversation.
That's an excellent addition. Excellent addition. Because I actually had in a note cascade of reactions earlier, and you nailed it. I mean, from a simple act of creating a more hospitable environment for the young root system can translate into, bigger differences later. Yeah. Well said.
And I would like to emphasize that, different crops have different amount of benefit that they can get from microbial products, which is very, very true. And that is something that we really have to quantify and use it for justification. And that is where, the record keeping becomes very important as well. And if a grower is going to have 5 or 6 rows and they are going to have microbial products applied to 5 of them and not to one of those rows, then there is a control on your treatment, and they can see for themselves whether it works in the context of that particular crop, that particular variety, that particular, production practices that they have adopted. So those variations should be recognized as we choose different inputs, not just the major nutrients, micronutrients, but also this one. I have another question for the other speakers here and also the listeners. The thing is, there are different types of soil microbial products that we can apply. We are applying some in the form of like a seed treatment, foliar, and other applications are also there. So, which ones have more impact? Which ones have more effect? If anybody can speak to that, I will learn something new with that.
Yeah. Anybody want to address that? That's something that's going to be kind of hanging out there. We'll have to come back to it.
Well, I think Bonnie sort of Matt sort of recapitulated that. She was saying that if we're applying that early in the seed and then or as a transplant, then you have that preventive application, and then that benefit of having that good root mass that will cascade of reactions that will benefit the plant. So I wrote that one too as well. But so I think that is good. But then, if and Bonnie also said that, it's more of a preventative measure. But if you have really, but it will be more of a biopesticide application. If you want to do a foliar application, maybe later for a specific disease, that would be a biopesticide application there. And that.
So I've been doing my best to keep a few notes, and I'd like to offer just kind of as a weigh-in point here, a check-in point. Four points that I have recorded for myself regarding the specific question that we began the conversation with. How to tell if these products are worth it, meaning they're providing an adequate return on investment. That was kind of the rallying point of our call and our conversation. You probably all have your own notes. I'd like to just offer these 4 and suggest that we come up with a 5th to round it out so we can count on one hand the main points that or steps that a grower should take, or maybe an investigator or a grower consultant could take to assess whether or not the product is offering an adequate return on investment. In kind of in order that we've taken them, it appears, my records anyway. First of all, have a control site, have an area that's not treated. To have treated and untreated in the same place, more or less in the same place at the same time, on the same crop, same variety, same soil type, same planting date, more or less everything be the same, except for the fact that one was treated and one was not treated. That's essential. And I'll go to a really quick sidebar. The growers that we are cooperating with and led by Nicole, coordinated by Nicole, and some of you on the call might know her or have spoken with her. She's coordinating a lot of experiments on vegetable farms in the Midwest and in Ohio. And as part of our process this year, she sent them all a bit of resources for conducting an experiment on farms, right? And some excellent resources that others actually prepared. the SARE handbook on on-farm research is one of those. And I think nearly all on-farm research guides speak to the need for a control, okay, so a control group, and the need for it to be always present. The second item was record keeping. I think Sabu was the first one to use the term specifically.
You used it.
Well, no, whatever. I mean, record keeping is super important, and so the more detailed, the more consistent, the more comprehensive the record keeping, perhaps the better. Some people are notoriously, anti-record keeping at some level. They already have enough to do. They don't want to add more. And others love records, Whatever your particular point on the spectrum, it seems like to get an adequate read on whether or not the product is working, you need some record of the test. Third, that multiple points of evaluation may be necessary or important. So that we spoke to root system size, crop health, overall health, perhaps disease incidence and or severity, response to water, response to fertilizer or other soil amendments. Of course, there's color and size. There's earliness of fruiting, amount of fruiting, fruit quality, as we talked about the grading situation. So multiple points of evaluation may be needed. Single points can work, but they would, of course, need to be very, very carefully selected. And because we talk often in our lab, and I'm sure other researchers do the same, what did we not measure that was important? What did we not quantify that was important? The fourth characteristic, for the actual calculations, going back to what Nate and Sabu have said and others have alluded to, well, of course, the actual calculation of value, which, this is more of Sabu's world, I think, from a disciplinary expertise, but, from a grower's perspective, it's how they pay bills and have a lifestyle. The assessment of value of the product will come down to their crop in the market. And that crop that market may actually fluctuate with what their competitors, their fellow growers, are doing and other products. So it's a very fluid situation, it's a highly variable situation, and to make these broad sweeping statements like, biostimulants always work or biostimulants never work is very, very likely to be incorrect. The truth is probably somewhere in between, and we get to it by these other points that were mentioned. Now, I might have missed something, and I guess in the few minutes that we have left, we can talk about what that might have been, or this fifth component of an evaluation, or other topics that come up. Are there any other, whatever the will of the group is?
I have a question on the effectiveness later in the season. There was a lot talked about strong roots. How does that relate to, is it effective later in the season?
I'll give a stab at it, but certainly others should comment too. My sense is that taking whatever steps can be taken reasonably and in a cost-effective manner, like perhaps applying an inoculant, if that supports very good root system development, that root system, that's, if you will, superior or improved or better root system, as being a foundational component of the plant's health, is going to position the crop or the individual plant to withstand certain stresses more effectively. And that could end up in higher yield. Now, you could say I grow a root crop, it could be carrots, it could be, potatoes aren't root crops, but I'm growing a crop that's below ground, or at least part of it, or is a root. My sense, later in the season, you can get the benefits of the better root system come later in the season if that root system allows the plant to withstand stress more effectively. It may also give you an opportunity, just thinking how it can go on the farm. If you manage to miss an irrigation for some reason, if you're actually a dryland farmer and you're not irrigating, that superior root system may get you through a dry spell. If you miss a fertilization or a fertilizer application, that superior root system may be in a position to get you through that. You may find that you could actually cut down on your watering and your fertility. So overall, it can give you economic and procedural benefits. What would be my initial assessment? That's a good question. Other questions, comments about the major do's and don'ts of assessing whether or not an inoculation is giving a good return on investment? Subbu, I don't know if you're at the point of recommending specifics about data collection or on-farm assessments of profit or somehow return on investment, or do you want to emphasize the basics of that? I mean, is there something that people you think might benefit from hearing on whether, regardless of the input, it could be microbial-based biostimulant or it could be something else, but does anything stand out to you as a, if you will, a consistent mistake or obstacle that people encounter in determining whether or not they're making more money thanks to a treatment?
Let me talk about that in general, okay? Not specifically for specialty crop growers or anything like that. Earlier it was mentioned that if you are going to add some amount of inputs, it's going to cost you more money, and are we able to make enough returns on top of the product that we produce? Obviously, the product is going to be of higher quantity and higher quality. And if we can get more value out of it, that's what we call the marginal benefit and the marginal cost. This is a huge thing within economics. So, every grower or every farmer have to keep track of what is the additional cost that they are incurring when they go after any input. And in this case, the input turned out to be microbial inoculants. And what are the ultimate benefits? Now, the benefits can be various. Okay, many benefits will be there. Now, are you able to monetize that in some form? A speaker already mentioned that there are different qualities, A versus B versus C. Now, if you are unable to get your higher quality grade as A, then if you are going after low-priced quality B to some other market, they are going to lose a lot of benefits. So we are unable to monetize. So anything that we can do to get better returns, it's a no-brainer. So we have to do that. And for how do we know that we are getting good returns? We obviously have to keep track of records. In fact, and this is a question that I ask my colleagues often. You are producing some crop in the field. Do you conduct small experiments in the field for the students over a period of time? And that is nothing but, control versus application of a certain input in that case. And here it could be a microbial inoculant as well. And keeping good records are really important, and especially in case of these specialty crops, the changes may be very minimal. So most of my, numbers that I gave earlier correspond to corn crop, which is a grain crop, field crop, and the production and the crop itself is very different from that of a specialty crop, which is of high value, which may be growing under controlled conditions, and they will incur additional expenses with regard to irrigation and covers and, greenhouse and things like that. So maybe these crops may be needing these microbial inoculants, much more than the field crops, which may be prone to, say, they may be resistant to, say, the weather conditions, whereas here we are controlling the weather conditions within the greenhouse growing conditions. So those differences also need to be taken into account, and I'm sure all the growers will be thinking about it, and that only, lets them continue to grow that crop. So keeping track of records, keeping track of all this information will really help. And over time, the trend matters a lot. For the reason that it works in one particular crop in one location, it may not be working in other.
That could be like 3 out of 5 years.
Exactly.
That could be 1 out of every 2 out of every 3 years. You get that return on investment, but is the trend line up?
Exactly. Is it trending up over time?
Yeah.
And, that is something that I often tell my students in my class. Okay, right now you are making money. How are you going to move forward in the future? How much more money you are going to expect? What changes can you incorporate now so that you can get higher returns as you move forward? And how do you keep track of it? And since I'm an educator, since I work with students often, I bring my students into conversation. One of the things that they can do is they have to keep track of metrics. Creating metrics is very, very critical. And these metrics can be traditional metrics like financial ratios, return on investment, return on equity, things like that. Otherwise, they can also create their own metrics. Oh, you know what? I used this much amount of input in this particular crop, and this was the overall quality outcomes that I got.
Okay.
So now, that is not traditionally represented in any financial statement. Now, that is a metric you have to create for your own self.
Okay.
One of the things that I tell my students is create a dashboard, and keep track of that dashboard. What is happening for those metrics. Those metrics are very specific for your operations. Keep track of it. And another thing that we tell business owners, the business planning process is this lean process. Lean process is, do it in small steps, change and pivot, and then move and do something different if something doesn't work.
Experiment,
exactly.
Experiment.
That's a simple word to put that. Experiment and then move forward with that.
Yeah, so don't treat the whole farm.
Exactly.
In this case might be, don't apply it to all crops, whole with abandon, experiment, keep the records. And I do want to return with the few minutes we have available. I want to return to the monetized statement that you made. I think that was a spot on and very helpful summary, of what they can do. A layman, an informal description of the monetizing process that you talked about. I know that growers do this, really successful, if you will, growers do this. It's my understanding that monetizing means like taking the characteristic that the spinach is greener and turning that into actual money, right?
Yeah.
Because without being able to monetize the greenness, or like Nate, you were saying, the structural rigidity of the plant, and other characteristics of the frame of the poinsettia that you were mentioning, unless they can actually turn that into money, it kind of stays out there, not very useful to them, right? So if a microbial biostimulant facilitates faster growth, but that's all it does, and they can't turn that faster growth into money, then there's a question as to, do they make any more money on it? That's still open. They have to say, well, did it get me to market sooner? And because I got to market sooner, I got a higher price. Maybe it only gave me one extra harvest, but it was an earlier harvest, and I made more money with that first harvest than I paid back my whole inoculation program with the first harvest, the first delivery to market, and the rest was a wash, right?
It could be.
And possibly because I'm the first to market, I'm also there to sell other things, They have to turn that characteristic of the biostimulant application that it may give into money. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a very good.
And then they have to track it.
Exactly.
To understand it. So I think, some of the conversations I've had over the recent months with people about that process have opened my eyes to the possibility that some of them, I think to the point that Nate was making and others, crop by crop, planting by planting, situation by situation specific, that these are more than insurance policies.
Yeah.
They may give that edge.
I would like to ask a question to the participants here, especially those who are working with growers on a regular basis. Marketing is huge, so if we are adopting certain set of inputs, microbial, products being some of the inputs, if you are able to develop a good story about your own production operation and explain it in a convincing manner to the buyer. The buyer could be a business, or the buyer could be a retail customer, and they have to see your operations. They have to recognize that you are doing certain things for the good of the crop, for the good of, maybe some common greater good, for the good of them. And if the customer sees that, then they are more likely to buy. And as part of it, telling that story matters as well. And as part of telling the story, whether microbial products fit in, that's another marketing angle that I would like to,
that's an interesting
open it up and then see. I'm sure, there are lots of microbial products that have made tremendous difference for different growers and farmers. How much of it is actually part of the conversation? Can we bring it into the mainstream conversation? Can we highlight the microbes?
Can inoculants become the probiotic of crop production, right? So everyone understands probiotics and everyone's cool with probiotics, and can actually anyone use that? Hey, I use probiotics on my plant.
Exactly.
Open up a market just because they use them. They may not get any more yield at all, but they've got more market. Is that what you're driving at?
Exactly. And, talking about that and whether customers are willing to pay more for it.
Yeah.
And, conducting more research and those kind of things can really happen. The only thing is, we need to find the people that are willing to cooperate and are willing to test it out, willing to bring that into everybody.
Well, I'll just call attention to the fact that for those who are listening and interested in this kind of thing, would like to follow up with anyone on this call, Bonnie, Soledad, Andy, Sabu, myself, Nicole, Stephanie, being silent in the background but working away. You can reach any of us directly by going to the Bugs and Drug webpage because our emails are there. Okay. And if you just click on them, if you're an email person, you can find them quite readily. And of course, you can always ring them up by phone as well. So, folks, are there remaining questions or comments about are these products worth it that we need to cover? The big question, how to tell are they working? How to tell if they're working?
Matt, this is Nate again. I'm going to chime in. You had a recap 1 through 4, control, record keeping, multiple evaluation point, calculation of value, ROI, and we're seeking a fifth. On the multiple points of evaluation, I wanted to add that some of the products that I've worked with have other crop responses that growers may be interested in and may want to evaluate. I would categorize them in the forms of tolerance to drought, heat, cold, salt, and improving soil structure and porosity, which allows them to be more resilient to, let's say, hypersaturation of the soil. So not everybody has these conditions. These will flux based on the land they're farming or the seasonal environmental conditions, but those are also points of measures that many products will bring benefit in. So that's one thing to look at. And then a 0.5, as far as evaluating if they work, I think part of evaluating if they work, it's how they fit a grower's logistics. Hey, it's a wonderful product, but it's impractical to use. How do I deploy it? Based on labeled recommendations, it's never going to fit my operation. So finding products that bridge the gap of logistical application or working with a consultant that can guide that process. I think ease of use is important relative to odor and solubility, as well as shelf stability.
That's a great point, Nate, and I think we covered, my memory is that we covered it in bits and pieces in calls 1 and 2 of this year. I think we had at one point, it might have been in call 2 back in April, we had some lengthier conversation around that fit that you're talking about. Hey, I use such and such copper-based fungicide. Can I use a fungal inoculant?
Right.
These sorts of questions. I have, water that's this and this composition. Can I actually use it? So the fit, the logistics that you mentioned are the ease of use. That's an enormously important scenario because if one has to twist themselves into a pretzel, and do take extreme measures to use the product, that's just more of the grower's time. That's with time and time being money. So that's a great point. Any other questions or comments that you folks feel?
Yeah, I have a comment. This is Jim Porterfield.
Yeah.
This kind of falls under both record keeping and multiple points of evaluation, but one of the things you can do to measure whether or not you're getting the result is early on, start using leaf sap analysis. Because I've seen on corn, even at V4, I can see the differences in rates of nitrogen, and on top of that, the differences because of biological application.
Excellent point. So we have,
then you translate it down
the visual and the non-visual points, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You translate it down to yield at the end of the year as well, and then maybe, even remediate in between as to say, I need this, and do it and see if that makes a difference.
That's a good point, Jim. For those that grow edible, crops that are basically taken from the field and eaten, say some fresh vegetables and herbs and the like, fruits too, that analysis that you're talking about, Jim, with leaf sap, that could be extended to aspects of quality, and we could say, look, if the quality of the crop beyond the visual does improve, and if it's only because it's an indirect effect, if it's present in part because of the inoculant treatment, then it's still legitimate, right? So if there's an improvement in quality as the consumer would describe it, then farmers, growers may want to look at that carefully as well if that happens to be their type of market. Yeah.
Right.
Other major questions or comments that speak to how to tell if the product is working and providing a return on investment. Anything that we've left untouched here. It's been a wide-ranging conversation, but a good one, I think. We've touched on a lot of those points. What comes out to me is that there's no single one, process that can be written down in sufficient detail that would apply to every grower. There are only, perhaps at this time anyway, guidelines. Maybe we've come up with some here. Guidelines that people can use and adapt to their own operation. And I don't want to, I want to certainly end on a very, very positive note and a correct note, of course. But I keep drawing this distinction between plant pathology and assessments of plant disease and then assessments of other types. And I know I've said before it's not simple and easy on the disease side, but so much of the attention that growers give to crops deals with the status that they have, insect pressure, disease pressure. And some have become used to seeing, if you will, dramatic results. More plants dying or fewer plants dying, fewer plants affected, or literally the insect pest is gone. But these microbial biostimulants are in an entirely different category, right? And so it takes a different eye, perhaps, and maybe like Jim was saying, even a different instrument, leaf sap analysis. It takes a different approach, perhaps, and it has to be more personalized to the crop, perhaps. That's something that's come out to me. Hopefully, we've come up with some good guidelines here. Okay, I know that we're
Matt.
Yeah, please.
Matt, I have a parting comment. For anybody who has the wherewithal and interest, I know that most of your let's say farming base out there. I'm in California, but I cover North America and travel globally doing this kind of stuff. Most of my market is floriculture. Some is in the ground. A lot of it's in artificial media in containers. I also deal with agronomic crops, deploying these kinds of things and providing this support. when it comes to the root enhancement and building the foundation or establishing the foundation of crop health and performance that you've referenced, in field conditions, to visit the roots is obviously semi-destructive. So we put a spade in the soil and we exhume a plant and we say, does that look any different, right? And then we've affected that particular spot. For anybody who's inclined, I would encourage them to do, if possible, a parallel test, though albeit not the same conditions. If they do it in containers, they can do non-destructive analysis on the roots. They can pop them out of the pots. I'm used to seeing double or more the root biomass in 3 weeks' time. And you can do that by slipping the plant out of the pot. We've all done it with a house plant. And just glancing the roots. You have a population of, 10 treated, 10 untreated, and culture them, give them some shelter. It's eye-opening. It can be really eye-opening. It's not meant to be an equivalent. This directly translates to what's happening in the field, but it gives you perspective. Can I see a difference or not?
Nate, that is superb. I'm just sitting here thinking that is just a great way to cap off this conversation. What it makes me think of is the parallel between what it reminds me of is what some university, not all the university, but other researchers do. That's the intent, is that fine level analysis, if you will, and it's not meant to translate to all farms and all farming situations, but it does give you a glimpse. And I think your advice is terrific. If growers are able to pot up some plants and track them through the year, give them the same kind of love and attention that they give their field crops, the ones for real, and inoculate some and don't inoculate others, and then take a peek at the roots. That's super idea. Thank you for sharing that.
You bet. The trick's going to be striking the right chord with a blend of some field soil and artificial media, because the drainage physics in a container are much different than a field setting.
No doubt. So that might be where the seventh phone call we have one spring of 2019. That might be where we start. So that brings us to the end of this call, and I'd like to just remind you that the recording of today's call is going to be online as soon as we can arrange for that. Please, share the availability of that with other people who you think might be interested in it. This is the third and final call of this spring, scheduled call of this spring. I'd like to just thank again all the resource people who were very generous with their time, including the four that we had on the call today. They were very generous with their time and expertise, and of course all of you who chimed in as well. It made the calls possible, and certainly made it worthwhile. You've made the process enjoyable and informative, and we just hope to hear from you going forward soon. And in as much as the website is useful to you, please do pay attention to the Bugs in the Jug page. We'll try to put there what might be coming up, and pay attention other ways as well. But unless there are any parting comments or questions, we should probably wrap up today. And wish everyone good luck with what's going on in their life.
Question: the email contact you provided us, Biostimulants.com, is that just for this phone call contact, this conference call, and not to be used thereafter?
It is not. No, it is to be used anytime you'd like it. Biostims Ferts is the address. I believe it's on our page, but if it's not, we'll double check. We also have, if you might know, a microbial-based product listserv. Growing in membership. That's another way to communicate with people specifically on this topic. But Nate, it's Biostims Ferts. It's not specific to the phone calls. It comes to me. That allows me to put it out to other resource people as needed. And of course, you can contact any of us directly as well.
Terrific. Thank you very much.
Any other questions, comments to wrap up? Okay. Hearing none. Good luck.